Paul Blaney. And most of you, we really miss Paul when he is not here. It's just not the same without that piano. Of course, we like you too, Paul. But anyway, he is a professor of psychology at Emory and Henry, and then he will tell you the rest of the story. When I got the little Friday blip and saw that he had tied his reservationist into the humanist, theist, deist, Christian theme, I thought, oh, how perfect! This just makes perfect sense. So, Paul?
I've long had an amateur's interest in words. For instance, I've noticed that a lot of words that are isms, words that end in ism, have adjectives that go with them, like socialism has socialist, impressionism has impressionist, anti-disestablishmentarianism has anti-disestablishmentarianist, and universalism has its universalists. There are lots of, this is true, that there are a lot of ist words that have isms, but there are also some ist words that end in ist, that don't have any isms to go with it. For instance, Nancy and I are both psychologists, but there's no such thing as psychologism. And our son is training to be an anesthesiologist, but if this has something to do with his having adopted any faith or ideology called anesthesiologism, he's not told us about it yet. So my son and his sister, or daughter, know of my interest in words, and they also know of my love for the humor of an author named Roy Blount Jr., whom you may know from Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. And so they thoughtfully got me a signed copy of his new book, very quirky book, entitled Alphabet Juice for Christmas. And reading this book, I learned that Roy Blount Jr., too, is aware of the two meanings of the suffix ist, the kind related to isms and the kind not related to isms. And you'll see this from an entry in his book, Alphabet Juice, which is my text for this morning. Reservationist. I heard a word that was new to me the other day when I called to reserve a car to take me to LaGuardia the following morning, because I know from experience how few available cabs there are around 8:30 to 9 in the morning. I got a recording. Please hold on, it said. Our reservationist will be on in a moment. And it hit me. Can this at last be my religion? I'm not an indifferentist or a nothingitarian. I'm a reservationist, one who refuses to believe in anything without reservations. I'm not boasting. I'm not trying to proselytize. I'm not even saying I'm a good one. I'm just saying that's what I am. Perhaps. So that, when I read that planted the seed for this morning's message, the reservationist in me. I guess you could say it's an add-on to the series that we had in March. As you know, yes, there is some humanist in me and some theist in me, and I certainly do view Christianity with a certain fondness and respect, and along with Bob Hill, there is some Jeffersonian in me too. But when all is said and done, what I most embrace is reservationism, and I suspect that there are a lot of other UUs for whom this is also the case. I've often said that the loose thread that holds us UUs together is that when we're given the religion questionnaire, rather than checking the Christian box or the Jewish box or the Islam box or even the other box or even the none box, we check the none of the above box. But just as Roy Blunt Jr. does not favor nothingitarianism, I think I'll shun the none of the aboveism as well and be the second member of his reservationism denomination. So you can think of today's message as my reservationist manifesto. Now, people tend to have reservations only about things they care about. I'll not bother you by talking about my reservations about fascism or sadism. If there aren't any pros, then you don't bother talking about the cons. So I'm going to like to talk about a few approaches to life which I respect, but about which I have some reservations. And since this is a UU service, let's start with two, Universalism and Unitarianism, about which my understanding is not deep, but such as it is. As I understand it, the traditional core of Universalism is the belief that God's forgiveness extends to the entire creation, not just to those who are chosen or unusually virtuous. Everything in God's creation can be viewed as sacred. So what we call holy books, holy places, holy people, sacraments, are really not so different from everything else. I like that. I like it a lot. I like thinking, for instance, that it's just as sacred a trust to be a teacher or a psychologist or a garbage collector or whatever, as it is to be, say, a clergyman or a pope or a patriarch. In this sense, sacred really means vitally important, having some fundamental value, or pursuing something with integrity. But of course, I do have some reservations about universalism, at least about some versions of it. For one thing, it's a bit too God-focused for me. It also bears a slight odor of supernaturalism, which I don't care for, and it seems not to deal very well with questions of evil. Not that any other belief system does, but I don't think universalism even tries, as far as I can tell. So that's universalism. How about Unitarianism? This is an interesting one. As far as I can tell, the core of Unitarianism is its prefix, not its suffix, ism, but its prefix, unit, which of course is this pretty much means the same as mono, as in monotheism, which is to say one. The belief that there is one deity, one Creator God. Historically, the point of departure for Unitarianism was, as I understand it, Christianity. And Christianity, of course, pretends or claims to be a monotheistic religion. It claims that, but then it fudges. There's this pesky little matter of the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Now, Unitarianism is traditionally particularly skeptical about the godhood of the Son part. The Christian doctrine of Trinity claims that Father, Son, and Holy Ghost are really one, so presto changeo, monotheism, they say, to which I respond, give me a break. God may not be man-made, but theology certainly is. If a theological belief generates a logical impossibility, such as that something is both three and one, then the problem lies with the theology, not with the inability of human mind to comprehend spiritual mysteries, blah, blah, blah. Traditional Christianity, especially as seen in its Roman Catholic version, is even less monotheistic than is suggested by the doctrine of the Trinity. That kind of Christianity has, over the centuries, had what we can describe as creeping polytheism, mainly treating living pontiffs and dead saints as quasi-deities, and in particular by the veneration of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Note not only the virgin part, but also the blessed part, right? That's part of what I would describe as creeping polytheism. So, I started out by saying that I was expressing my reservations about Unitarianism, and now it may seem like I'm telling you why I like Unitarianism better than I like Christianity. Not so fast. The problem is that I have reservations about monotheism itself. The one God of Unitarianism is, as far as I can tell, pretty much some version of the Judeo-Christian God, who, putting aside the Son and the Holy Ghost, is still both a God of mercy and a God of justice. Mercy, justice. Two, if my math is correct. Now, it's true, 2 is closer to 1 than 3 is, but 2 is still not 1, especially since mercy and justice in the real world often collide with one another. In other words, the notion that both justice and mercy can be melded into the core of one holy being is, if anything, even more of a challenge than is the doctrine of the Trinity. What I'm telling you is, I think that maybe the unit in Unitarianism is just a little bit disingenuous. Now, I'll grant you, it's very, very appealing to think that out there is someone, some deity, some whatever, who has figured out how to merge the two, how to temper justice with mercy, and how to temper mercy with justice. Somebody who's reconciled these two somewhat contradictory things, these contradictory goods with a capital G. If there is a God who has untied that Gordian knot, she has my resounding admiration, my allegiance, and my eternal worship. However, nowhere, not in the Bible, not anywhere that I have found, is there a convincing description of such a God. The God of the Old Testament, the Lord our God, who is one God, veers back and forth between the harsh parent, warmongering, guilt trip, punitive justice Blaine, and on the other side, the loving, forgiving parent, devoted, gentle shepherd Lane, right? If he's one person, he's a mystery. And so a troubling mystery lies at the corner of Unitarianism. I know it's cheesy to criticize something unless you have something better to offer. And I most emphatically do not have anything better to offer. But still, it is a pretty monumental lapse when you come right down to it. Now, you may say, let's just have a monotheistic God who's entirely about love, mercy, and forgiveness. Maybe throw in a little bit of emotional support, unconditional positive regard, and cognitive behavior therapy to bring it up to date. Maybe that would be a Unitarianism that we could all embrace without reservation. Well, if that works for you, fine. And it almost does for me, but not quite. I really do think that mercy, untempered with justice, is a dead end. As I said when commenting about universalism, there's that pesky problem of evil. And if I hadn't already been going to be up here speaking today, I probably would have been up there dropping some stones about the Branch Davidians and Columbine and the federal building in Oklahoma, anniversaries that we are celebrating about now, not exactly celebrating. Some Christians have tried to make the Christian God a God of mercy only. It's sometimes said that the Old Testament God is a God of justice, which the New Testament replaced with a God of mercy. And there's, of course, a thread of truth to that, but it's not a fair portrayal of what you see in either the Old or the New Testament. The fact is that Jesus was a pretty harsh judge at times, and I'm going to actually be quoting some passages from Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount this morning, from the Bible, mainly Matthew, Gospel of Matthew. Here's the first of them, words of Jesus. In the King James probably, so I have to read carefully because it doesn't flow off my lips. You have heard it was said of them of old time, thou shalt not kill, one of the commandments. and whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you, I, Jesus, say to you, that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment, and whosoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. That's the first one. Here's another one a little bit later. Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say to you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Well, Jesus' point was presumably that virtue has to do more with intent and with your state of mind than it does with whether or not you're following some set of rules, and certainly I agree with that. You know, people can always fudge on rules, but what's behind it is more important. So let's check one off for Jesus on that one. So what's my reservation about this approach? Well, my main reservation is that it sets way too high a bar. Even the patently virtuous Jimmy Carter lusted in his heart. Remember that? Now, I can only speak for members of the male persuasion. But I have trouble worshiping any God who would equip us males with as much sexual desire and as much imagination as we have, and who would then send us off to eternal punishment for having sexual fantasies. Unfair, unfair, unfair. Oh. Amen. All right. As long as we're talking about Jesus' treatment of the Jewish traditional laws, there's another passage in the Sermon on the Mount that deserves a bit of attention. I'll read it. This is powerful stuff. Ye have heard that it hath been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you. And pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. Wow. Talk about high standards. This one is a real stretch. The sad thing is that most people who call themselves Christians seem to have decided it sets such a high standard that the only way to deal with it is to ignore it. And that's a pity because, impossible as it is to meet, I think it's a whole lot more worth striving for than is, say, the avoidance of sexual fantasies. There are, of course, lots more aspects of Christianity that I have reservations about, but most of them have to do with the quirks of particular figures, particular persons, particular denominational traditions, particular movements. And of course, it's not exactly fair to blame Christianity for every absurdity perpetrated under that flag there, right? As an aside, when thinking about today's message, I happened to read a column by a man who is the reason I continue to subscribe to the Bristol Herald Courier, namely Leonard Pitts. Let me quote from a column that was published in the Bristol Herald Courier from a few weeks ago. Quote, the number of American people who call themselves Christian is 76%, down 10 percentage points since 1990. Incredible fast drop in such a short period of time. I like to think, Pitt says, the most important cause is that religion has become an ugly thing. People of faith should ask themselves, what is the cumulative effect upon outside observers of Jim and Tammy Faye Baker living like lords and the largesse of the poor, multiplied by Jimmy Swaggart's pornography addiction, plus Eric Rudolph bombing Olympians and gays in the name of God, multiplied by the church that kicked out some members because they voted Democrat, divided by people caterwauling on courthouse steps as a rock bearing the Ten Commandments was removed, multiplied by the square root of Catholic priests preying on little boys while the church looked on and did nothing, plus the ongoing demonization of gay men and lesbians, divided by all those traditional values coalitions and family values councils, that try to bully public schools into becoming worship houses with morning prayers and science lessons from the book of Genesis? Question mark. That's the thing is a question, right? As Pitts then says, I'm glad I know more about religion than can be garnered from newspaper headlines. Before I move on, I need to just backtrack for a second to talk a little bit more about my reservations about the Judeo-Christian tradition. Not about the sordid perversions I just listed, but about its essential nature. As I mentioned, mercy and justice seem to be the core virtues of the tradition, but it's not that simple. For instance, the classic compendium lists 10 commandments. These 10 commandments on the stone that we were talking about, that Pitts was talking about in the courthouse, and so on. And this is the list that Jesus no doubt had in mind in the Sermon on the Mount. The general problem with the 10 commandments is the same problem that I already mentioned with regard to justice and mercy, and that is sometimes they collide with one another, except when you have 10 of them, there are a lot more opportunities for collision than when you just have 2. Take, for example, commandment number 1. You shall have no other gods before me. And then commandment number 5. Honor your father and your mother. Imagine you've grown up in a devout Hindu household and you read these commandments. So you can follow number 1 and worship only Jehovah. But if you do so, you will most definitely break commandment number 5, because in worshiping Jehovah and Jehovah's only, you will likely be dishonoring, deeply dishonoring your father and your mother. People who say that the Bible gives clear answers to all moral dilemmas are, not to be unkind, deluded. One thing I like about Jesus was that he himself was a bit of a reservationist. He probably preached a lot of sermons that never got recorded in the Gospels, and who knows, maybe one of them was entitled The Reservationist in Me. I mean, think about it. One example is seen in the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus, in an obvious allusion to the 4th commandment about keeping the Sabbath holy, is quoted as saying, quote, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." In other words, he said that human and compassion and human need and common sense can trump even one of the 10 commandments. So when it came to the rules of his religion, Jesus was a pragmatist. He respected the need for exceptions. So that's real good. So I've expressed a few reservations regarding the religions that most of us are most familiar with, and in so doing, I've covered only a few of the flags behind me there. Insofar as having all those flags up there is a statement of toleration and tolerance and inclusiveness, I'm all for it. But if the reason we have all these flags up there is because we believe in religion per se, yes, those immortal words, imagine, no religion too. No Christianity, no Judaism, probably none of those flags there. No religion. Wow. I have to tell you, by the way, that the church that we used to belong to, which was a very liberal congregational church, the soloists chose their own songs. And when the tenor soloist one day chose to sing that song from the front of the church, I was proud that nobody threw rotten tomatoes or anything. It was very interesting. Well, and notice that John Lennon, he says no religion, but he also says no nationalism and no patriotism, as in the phrase, imagine there's no countries, nothing to kill or die for. And also no materialism, no property-oriented social structures, as in the statement, imagine no possessions, no need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man, imagine all the people of the world, all the people sharing all the world. John Lennon. So, have we finally found something we can embrace without reservations in the immortal words of John Lennon? I don't think so. Maybe I should be more of a dreamer, but I really don't think people can be counted on always to do right by each other, unless there are at least some incentives to nudge them along, at the very least. In this vein, a few years ago, the Nobel laureate Steven Weinberg famously made a very John Lennon-like comment that went as follows. For good people to do evil requires religion. It actually was prefaced by saying, good people will do good things and bad people will do bad things, but for good people to do bad things, that takes religion. But to this, Freeman Dyson, also a very famous physicist, replied, yes, and for evil people to do good things also requires religion. And indeed, I've known people for whom I would say their religion did, I believe, smooth their rough edges and bring out their best qualities and keep their worst qualities under tow. Dyson might have also added that good sometimes requires patriotism and laws about ownership. Sorry, John Lennon, but when it comes to imagining a world without religion and countries and possessions with you, when I imagine this, what comes to mind is not entirely rosy. I have some reservations about it. Well, it's time for me to wrap up this wandering talk. It may seem to you that the real underpinning of my reservation is that I'm critical about this, that, and everything, and that, in fact, it has a quality of arrogance about it. After all, in being a reservationist, I'm sort of setting myself up as the judge of what's good and bad about each and every religious tradition. Well, sort of, yeah, I guess so. And yeah, I mean, it is one thing for Thomas Jefferson to edit the Bible, but I probably would have reservations about his edits, but now maybe it would just be a little bit arrogant of me to decide that I was going to publish my own sets of edits of the Bible. So, it's true that there is something arrogant about this, and it's also important, I think, for us to remember that if we're going to be that arrogant, if I'm going to be that arrogant, I better approach this whole thing with a little bit of humility and caution. But of course, reservationism is more than just arrogance. It may be a new word, thanks to Roy Blunt Jr., but at least in my mind, the threads that it ties together are not new. I teach a liberal arts course entitled The Western Tradition, or spring version of the Western Tradition, to every spring to a group of college freshmen, small group. And so I know I wouldn't have before I started teaching the course, but I can identify some of the major threads that I'm talking about here today. And I think probably there are three of them that I can mention briefly. One of them would be rationalism, another would be skepticism, and a third would be existentialism. Each of these three has a definable history within the intellectual tradition of Western civilization within the last few centuries. Now, the word rationalism, I think you would know what that means. Skepticism, it's pretty much self-explanatory. But I want to just comment very briefly on existentialism. And the best way that I can let you know what I mean anyway when I talk about reservationism and its relationship to existentialism is to do so in the words of the famous closet existentialist, Bob Hill, uttered from this very lectern in this very place just 2 weeks ago. And I quote, "Life has no meanings. We give the meaning to life." Life has no meanings. We give the meaning to life. I give the meaning to life. You give the meaning to life. This week, I led my freshman students in discussions of both fundamentalism and existentialism. This is the common syllabus. I was told to do this, very timely. And there was class discussion, and one very perceptive student spoke of how hard it would be, how hard it is, to live within the narrow, rule-bound strictures of fundamentalism. Yeah. Another perceptive student, though, suggested that it might be still harder to try to establish a moral life in the absence of well-defined rules and external strictures. Check that one too. It was, of course, this latter student who identified the fundamental challenge of reservationism. The freedom to pick and choose is, if taken seriously, quite a responsibility. What are the easier alternatives? The easier alternatives are to swallow hook, line, and sinker an established religion, provides a very easy route of escape from that freedom of responsibility. Another easy route is to ridicule everything. I mean, ridiculing is so much fun. But from my viewpoint, neither of these escape routes would be honest. Both of them would be a cop-out. Why is this the case? It is the case because I am a reservationist. Thank you.